the treaty territory of the Anishinaabe, which is defined within the pre-Confederation treaty known as the London Township Treaty of 1796. Throughout time, this region has also become the current home to the Haudenosaunee and Lenape nations. First thing on our agenda will be the completion and acceptance of the agenda. I'm sure you've all had a chance to review it. Can I get someone to move and second acceptance of the agenda? Moved by Shelley, seconded by John. All those in favor? So that matter is passed. Any disclosures of pecuniary interest from anyone today? There being none, I will look for a motion to approve the minutes of the previous meeting. Again, hopefully you've had a chance to review those. Moved by John, seconded by Adrian. All in favor? Thank you very much. I'm not aware of any communications, delegations, or presentations. So we will move to the consent agenda items, and there are 3 items. So maybe we could just get moving in second, receipt of all 3 at once, and then we'll get Paul to make any presentation. Shelley will move acceptance of a receipt of all 3. Can I get a seconder? John, okay. So it's been moved and seconded, and now Paul, we'll let you make any comments you want on the 3 reports, A, B, and C. So there's the CEO report, then you can move on to the vacancy management report, and then the tenant director resignation.
Okay, I think just a few highlights from the CEO report. Just with COVID in its sort of later stage of acceptance, where it's still around, but somewhat more in control. In-person conferences have started back up, so we're trying to push the organization to be engaged in the sector. So I attended the International Housing Partnership Leadership Exchange in Toronto, which sort of was a good way to bring in folks from the US, the UK, Australia, and Canada and talk about affordable housing, what's happening. Touched on a lot of issues like the environment, environmental impact on housing, the economy, and just policy framework. So it's sort of a good way to sort of think about how, if we're thinking about the right things when we're talking about planning housing. So that is a annual conference, and we learned a lot about, and this one was in Toronto, so we learned a little bit of, the Regent Park redevelopment, Wood Green's Homeward Bound program, and a few other programs that sort of are frameworks for improving housing in different communities. So quite beneficial. We also have the Ontario Nonprofit Housing Association conference coming up in November. So we'll be sending at least 2 managers to that, where they'll be able to sort of engage with colleagues in just different areas on including engagement, dealing with tenancy issues, basic building and sort of operation stuff. So it's good just to get back out and get staff to engage with others in the community sector to learn some best practices. I think COVID has sort of made everybody sort of think smaller. So I think thinking bigger is where they need to go, and they're excited for that. I think that's the only other note based on some conversations we've had with the board, just the community safety update, just remind the board that we talked about redeploying some of our security resources to add mobile patrols to our sites, and we're pleased that we reworked the model to take some of our static security at 3 of our high-profile sites, and by just adding mobile patrols, we're able to add 8 additional high-rise buildings in London, where they're getting at least 2 patrols a night at random times. So there's walkthroughs happening pretty much most nights across 11 of our properties that have been identified through the town halls, but also our staff on sort of some areas that we need to focus more. So we've been able to use the existing budget, spread it around differently, and we're improving our security services. That's the big things in relation to the CEO report. In terms of vacancy, we are still making progress on the target. The of note is sort of we're now back up to over 30 units restored in the maintenance team, which is sort of the summer. It decreased a little bit, so we're hoping to keep those targets up through the end of the year, which will keep us on track for our target. And the tenant placement team is, as expected, sort of reducing their numbers and their length of vacancy as by the end of the year as well. So we're on track on vacancies, and our vacancy rate is just over 3%. I'm sort of scrolling through the report, so it is 3.4%. So we'll continue to decrease that through the end of the year. And I think the third consent item was related to the resignation of Anne Marie Mitchell. She verbally resigned from the board at our last meeting, and she formally submitted that in writing. So we're sharing that with the board. We've already notified the city clerk's office, so just waiting for direction on when they're going to move that forward. So we need to start thinking about creating a subcommittee and just reassessing our process. I think the key thing for us to think about in that process is doing a little bit more work with prospective candidates directly to make sure they understand the workload, the time commitments, and things like that. I think that's one of the challenges we've had in the process that we put in place in COVID, is that we maybe never had that fulsome conversation that may be required for some folks, just so that they know what they're getting into, and they know the length of the commitment. So I think that's just minor kind of tweaks to the process we have in place, I think would suffice to resolve that. So with that, I turn it back to the chair for questions.
I forgot, has Laura been here before, or is Laura, are you new to this group?
No.
Not to the board meeting, no.
Okay, first time I've seen you, I think, so.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Questions of Paul then from his report. Adrian, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Paul, in your discussions with the nonprofit association, were you able to determine or gain any information as to whether other organizations are encountering the same pressures for homelessness as we are here in London, Middlesex?
Yes, that is an issue, at least across the Canadian providers. I don't think I've had that specific conversation with the international partners, but with the folks in Ontario for sure. We've all experienced the eviction moratorium. We've all experienced the delays in the landlord-tenant board. We've all experienced the reduction in supports and services available to the tenants that are vulnerable and at risk of losing their housing. So we've all experienced that, and we're all responding a little bit differently in every service area. So yeah, it is a fairly consistent theme across Ontario.
I have another question, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
And that is, in some dialogue with the city staff, there's some indication that given the Southwestern, or London is the center for social services in Southwestern Ontario, that some people are being dropped off and bussed into the city for services and then left homeless. Is there any, have you encountered any of that?
Everybody that we house right now comes through the waitlist system. And a lot of those folks are high needs, vulnerable, homeless, or have experienced homeless or violence in their recent experience. So I don't know. We wouldn't have heard anything like that. Okay. But you know, we have been consistently housing folks with lived experience of homelessness and living rough and living in the shelter for the last few years. So it's, I think for us, where they came from is a layer that not necessarily fits into the equation of how we help support them right now. Okay. And they would get into the housing access system and the shelter system and make their way to us through an established process. Because remember, we do have a wait list. So yeah. It sort of wouldn't, by the time they might make to us, if that was the case, that wouldn't be their current reality. They would have already been in the city for a number of months or longer before they got any access to housing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thanks. John, go ahead. Oh, you're gonna, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. through you, Chair, to Paul. Paul, thanks so much for the report. I'm glad you got to go to some in-person stuff, and it sounded really interesting from what I read in the report. I guess for information, I wanted to mention there's a company called Pallet that they're doing sort of like they do like very quick shelter, and they provide a key to people that are living rough, and sort of, so it might be something to look into, to chatting with them about just some ideas and models that they may have around housing. And then I wondered if we had any contact with Indwell, just about their approach to supportive housing as well. And I wonder if there's a potential for a partnership or just some dialogue to tap into some ideas to improve services for the tenants.
Yeah, I think we're familiar. Well, we're familiar with Indwell, but we haven't met to discuss their model. I think that's one of the key challenges you hit on is the support model. It's, you really have to be conscious of who you're housing, what their needs are, and how you build supports for them to be successful. Our challenge is just we're not equipped to be a supportive housing provider. We provide housing in a supportive way, but that's different. So we have to make sure that we're threading the needle in the right place, because otherwise we put tenants in housing and our ability to help them be successful is really limited. So I think it's really understanding and working with the service manager on who should be going to what type of housing, as well as long as at the same time as strengthening the supports we should be providing for our current tenants. So it is quite complex, but just with the announcement of Soho, I was thinking we just need to have a different conversation with Indwell and those partners to sort of see where they're going and where they fit in meeting the housing needs, and if there's things that we could do, or if they can better serve some of the tenants that we've been getting. I mean, that's the conversations that need to take place within the system. But thank you for sharing.
Any other questions, comments? Then just from the chair, the one thing I noticed in the report, and I had actually briefly chatted with you about it, understaffed town halls, it says the report's going to come back, which is great, but then it talks about a development of a strategic plan. And I just wondered, from a board point of view, because I think we all want to look to the future of London Middlesex community housing, how would we plug in as a board to the strategic plan process that's going to go on, and what's the timeline?
Right. So we had an initial session just before you joined with the board. We do need a session this fall. So now with the staff sessions done and a good chunk of the tenant sessions done, I think we can sort of start framing out themes of what we're hearing, because I think that's important for the board to know what the staff and tenants and the community is saying. So we should be scheduling that before the end of the year to sort of get some guidance and input on some of the strategic framing pieces. So we just finished all the report backs to tenants. We'll get the report back to staff by the end of next week. So once with that in place, we will set something up for the board, and whether we utilize a board meeting, I'll speak to you about timing and
great. And just to follow up on that, those reports that are going to be compiled with regard to what tenants are saying, will one of our committees, will the tenant services committee be seeing that, or will somebody?
Yeah, we have a tenant service committee coming up in the next few weeks, I think. So we can put that bundle on the tenant service committee. Great.
Yeah, I just think that would be really helpful for the board to sort of have a flavor of what the input was from tenants at those meetings, and if it sort of informs what we do going forward. Thank you very much, Paul.
You're welcome.
Anything else before I call this, just to call the vote on receiving this? Nope. Okay, I'll call the vote. All in favor of receiving these three reports, and that is also passed. Thank you very much, Paul. Very much appreciated. There are no in-camera items, so we'll go to item 10, which is the staff report 2022-63 employee monitoring policy. Paul, that is your presentation.
All right. I'm thinking fairly quick. Recent legislation changes with the province of Ontario requires every employer with more than 25 employees to have a policy on electronic monitoring. So this policy is sort of an umbrella policy that we're getting approved. In it, we identify the requirements of the policy, the areas that we are monitoring employees or have the ability to monitor employees. In not all cases we are, and just confirming that we have protocols in place that meet the requirements of the policy. So the policy requires us to tell people how and in what circumstances we may electronically monitor employees and the purpose of which the information is going to be used. So that's covered in the protocols. And we have already those in place. So our information technology policy covers, it meets the requirements of this, but we have different tools out there in use in the buildings, like access control and GPS in the vehicles, that isn't really specifically named in the IT policy. So we have individual protocols in place for that. So we're reviewing those to make sure that it's still compliant with the legislation. We reviewed this with the union management meeting this morning. The union has no questions, so they're aware of it. So we're just going to review the procedures in place and move forward if there's any issues.
Right. Okay, any questions, comments on the policy? Adrian, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Paul, the only question I have is that some of the communication or correspondence could contain some really rather sensitive and confidential information. How will that be dealt with?
Correspondence communication that we may potentially monitor? Is that
Well, yes,
what you're
like
yeah.
emails, phone calls, etc.
So we provide business tools for the use of the business, and that confidential information is covered under MFIPA, the Municipal Freedom of and Information Protection Privacy Act. So we already have a legislative framework that requires us to protect the personal privacy of individuals and protect private information of individuals. So those all come together. So this is just another layer that deals specifically with just the electronic capability to manage the same information. Because the same information that we would have electronically would have been 10 years ago just in a paper file related to a tenant. Now it may be in that paper file, an electronic file, and in an email. Just
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, I just need a motion to receive and approve. John, moved by John, seconded by Shelley. All in favor? Great, that matter is passed. The next two reports are Finance Committee reports. The first is the staff report 2022-64, which is a staff report on RFP 2022-R004, which is snow removal. Mr. Renaud, do you have any comments you'd like to make, or the committee chair? I know it came to the Finance Committee. If Ms. Jones has any comments either. Start with you, Chair. Any comments, or just turn it over to Mr. Renaud?
No, it's really straightforward. I'll see if Phil has any comments.
Great, thank you. Mr. Renaud?
Through you, Chair. Exactly what Shelley said. It is pretty straightforward. It's a retender of an existing contract that is getting a little old, and we needed to go to the market with that. The only difference we're looking at this time is going with the cost per season versus per incident and per service. Just to allow us to have the security in our budget amount, that we don't have that wild card running out there in the event that we have an incredibly horrible winter. This way it locks down the amount for us, so we've got a better able to predict where we're going to end up.
Thank you very much. Questions or comments? Then I'll just need someone to move, receive, and approval. Oh, sorry, John. Go ahead. Question.
Yeah, that's okay. No, thanks. Through you, Chair. I did have just a couple questions on this. I think it was Paul last time you had mentioned you're in the process of hiring a new procurement manager or something like that. And I'm just wondering about the procurement process, if there is a copy, if it can be sent, and then if the plan is when the manager's hired to review that. And I noticed in the snow removal that the cost, and my math could be off, but it seemed to be $130,000 more per year. So, and I understand like inflation and other things, factor into that, but I just wonder what the benefit provided by Doug's snow plowing and sanding is in comparison to companies who had been provided the contract in previous years and did the service at a lesser cost, I guess. Just wanted a little clarity on that. That's all.
Mr. Renault, you want to respond to that?
Yes, through you, Chair. Doug's was our existing snow removal contractor. So we've been with them for a number of years now, and felt it was appropriate to go to market to see where we're at. The other bidder came in, of course, higher than Doug's did. So Doug's remains the value. And I mean, you know, it makes sense. They've got home field advantage. You know, they understand our sites intimately. They know what needs to be done and the standards we're looking for. So it made sense to continue to remain with them.
Did that answer your question, John, or just want to make sure?
I guess the only other thing I think of is, you know, that makes sense. So when you go to market, how many bids are you accepting before you make a decision?
Typically, we'll accept as many bids that come in that meet the requirements of a tender. In this case, we only had 2 bidders, and that's not really proving to be unusual nowadays. We're finding it very difficult to get multiple bids on a lot of our tendered items. It's just the nature of the marketplace right now.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? All right, then I just need a motion for receipt and approval of that staff report. Adrian's moving it, Shelley is seconding it, all in favor? That matter is passed. And then we have a staff report on the HSC insurance program, and there was I don't know if everybody had picked it up, there's a revised recommendation with that. So I know Diana, you're going to present. Maybe you can explain why that happened, if that's possible. So I'll turn it over to you.
Just sorry, before Diana starts. No, I'm happy to turn it over to Diana. Just make sure with the revised recommendations, if we get Melissa to share them, just so that they're part of the meeting for those who may watch it later.
Perfect. Thank you.
Through Chair. So in this report, we're looking for approval to pay to HSC for our annual insurance coverage, $856,599.38. We had 20% increase in our premiums based on our reassessment of replacement costs of our fixed assets and the buildings. The only modification from the proposal which we brought to the Finance Committee is we were able to finalize our policy coverage for our 13 building generators, and we have final price, which is $22,343 plus applicable tax. In our original report, we estimated cost at around $2,000. So given the current market conditions for insurance and the housing corporations, we consider the 20% premium increase comparable with other housing and market and situations in the market, and looking for your approval.
Okay. Questions, comments? What's going on with mine?
So
there's the motion right there.
We're getting the motions, yes.
Yeah, we're getting the motion that we would be commenting on. So do we have questions, comments? Shelley, go ahead.
Thank you, through you, the chair. Diane, I just wanted to clarify, if my memory serves me correctly, we are required to use HSC as our insurance provider. Is that correct, through the municipality?
I wouldn't say we are required, but the HSC provides better support for the housing corporations and not-for-profit businesses, and they are required by law to provide coverage.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? I can see that. I can only see 4 or 5 people. Will the people asking questions pop up? Because it's still I'm still sharing my screen. Does anybody else have any questions, comments?
No.
No? Okay. So I just need someone to move receipt and approval. Moved by Shelley, seconded by someone else I can't see.
I'll second, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. All in favor? Okay. And that matter is passed. To just comment, that increase in insurance premiums, I remember any board I sat on, it's quite shocking how much premiums have gone up, insurance premiums in the last short period of time. So it's unfortunate. So under new business, I have two matters I just wanted to deal with quickly. The first is procurement approvals. John actually was asking about that. I was just looking, and I know Sean had indicated to me this is something he was thinking about doing, is just to refer back to first governance and then have it go through other committees, a review of our procurement policy in terms of what it is, what it says, what the limits are in terms of what the board has to approve, whether we can pre-approve, anything like that. So that's what I'm looking to do. So it would just be a motion to have staff come to the governance committee with suggestions or recommendations with regard to any amendments to the procurement policy. I'll move it. Is someone prepared to second it? Then we can have a discussion. John will second it. Any discussion on that? I have no conclusions or thoughts or anything like that. It's just something I think Sean indicated to me we should review. And so I thought it was a good idea. Shelley, go ahead.
Thank you. And through the chair, we did have a brief discussion regarding this at the Finance Committee. And there were really two key takeaways from that discussion. The first was to revisit the threshold of procurement items that require the board's approval given changes in the economy, to determine whether 75,000 still remains reasonable as a threshold or should that be raised. And the second issue was, oh my gosh, I'm having a senior
Paul, can you help us what else we talked about?
I do know that we just talked about that in some other jurisdictions, that once the capital plan is approved,
right,
the budget associated with each project is deemed approved, and therefore the procurement approval is more of a notification to the board versus something that's in the pathway for approval, which just expedites the timing as an option to look at. But I think that's part of what needs to be explored. To make sure that we're get to market and we get the work started in a timely manner. Sometimes, missing a finance committee meeting will cost you a month or 6 weeks. And if you're doing something like a paving season, that may mean you have to wait till next year. So I think that's sort of the other thing we talked about. And beyond that, I don't have my notes on anything else besides those two areas.
Right, John, go ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks for bringing this up, Phil. I think I'm wondering if we can do like a jurisdictional scan just to see what other housing corporations and other municipalities of similar sizes have done. And I also wonder, the thought that Shelley had about the threshold, is it worth looking into bids for longer periods of time so that if things do fluctuate, then we're kind of, at least for that period of time, we don't have to worry about cost increases. And then I just had a thought around how are we advertising? Like, we're saying we accept bids from everyone, but what is the process? Like, how do we advertise those? How do we market them? How do people become aware of the process to apply to be an approved vendor and whatnot? So I assume that would all be something we could consider when we hire the new procurement manager, when that process happens. But yeah, that's my thoughts on that. Thanks.
Right. And I think Paul is writing, and people are taking, and probably they'll take notes of what you said, John, which is all good input. So that's my thought anyway. So I just want to ask Paul, what would the time frame? Obviously, everybody's busy. When might the board or the committee, I guess initially the governance committee, see something from staff, just so we all are aware?
I think realistically, we're talking early in 2023. So we're in the process of interviews for the procurement manager. So onboarding is not really going to happen until towards the end of November. So, I think, and the approach I would have would be to have a discussion meeting, which would flesh out some more of these input from the governance committee to look at our current terms of reference and some of our practices, then go do the jurisdictional scan based on that discussion and come back at the next meeting with some recommendations. So, I think we can start the conversation in Q1. Realistically, we may not have any recommendations until the end of Q2, but that would be in line with the 2024 capital planning process.
Great.
So, yeah.
And I think it goes without saying, I'll get to you, John. The public's always very sensitive about procurement, how we do it.
Yeah.
How it works. So I think transparency, how we do it. And I think it's good for the board to review it with staff at this time. John, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Chair. Just wondering, I guess, is it reasonable to put off approving any like major non-essential procurement until this process is completed? Like clearly we can't postpone snow plowing until the spring, but is it reasonable to postpone decisions on major items that maybe aren't essential for right now until that process is completed? Is that reasonable?
Through the chair, I would not want to pursue that course of action. In conversations with our service manager and funder, their interest is in us spending our capital budget to keeping the projects moving. And we've had capacity issues when our funding increased. So we're sort of, I wouldn't say we're a little in lag on our funding. So we're still spending 2020 and 2021 based on sort of the time to procure and the time to finish projects. So I don't think that's a prudent course. We have been taking the spirit of what you're talking about, longer contracts, looking at how we procure to sort of lock in prices, but also make sure we get better standards. So every time we go out, whether it's the landscape and the snow clearing, we'll have cleaning contracts coming up. We are looking to improve them incrementally every time we go. And I think just for context, the environment that we came, most of our contracts should have been renewed at around the beginning of the pandemic or earlier. So we're just getting them back to renewal now. And without better standards and scope of works and quality information in these procurements, then we're going to have the same service level that we have today. And we want to make sure that we're working with our vendors to improve the service. And that's the contracts we have aren't really enabling that. So we don't want to purposefully delay it again. But if there's things that where it makes sense to move some major capital work that's complicated through a different process and a little more thoughtful, we can maybe move those back, but pull something that's a little simpler forward. So we just have to be conscious on not delaying the investment in the communities, because it was long overdue when we got the funding, and we're really at capacity. We want to keep it moving out the door.
Thanks, Paul. I appreciate that. That's
Yeah.
why I didn't make a motion or an assumption. I just curiously wanted to ask, so I appreciate it.
That's great. So Sean Lewis's picture wants to ask a question.
It's a better picture than what you'd see on video right now, because I've just gotten home and
your hair is perfect in your picture.
It is, yeah, it is not right now in real life because it is cold outside. So you don't want to see what a mess I am in right now. But yeah, I just first of all, I appreciate the discussions going on. Sorry, I had to jump in late, folks. I know Paul and I started this discussion a couple months back when I was in Phil's chair still, but I think it's really important to share. One of the things, and the chair will know this because we've asked this question ourselves in a different capacity. One of the problems with delaying anything is that when it comes to the funders' budget time, they look and say, well, you haven't spent it, you don't need it. And that's a very real, especially in what's going to be a challenging budget year for the funder as well. I wouldn't want to delay anything. The process we have, while it may be a little clunky at times, I think it's better to let it move ahead right now with any decisions that we have to make and get that money out the door in terms of investing it in the community. And then as we develop a more streamlined or different process, we can just deal with that moving forward. But I'd be really hesitant. I'd love for Paul to say to the funder at budget time, hey, we spent everything and we need more. Because I think every one of us knows we do need more to bring all of our units up to where we'd like them to be, where we'd like our standards for service to be. but we're going to have a hard time making that argument if there's still funding sitting unspent. So as much as the process needs an update, I would say, to Paul and the staff, spend, and let's use the process we have for now to get as much done for our tenants as we can.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? All right, so the motion is there. It's been moved and seconded. It's all in favor of this review and it coming back to governance in early 2023. That matter has passed. Thank you very much. Just that for me is an example, I think, of maybe as a board sometimes, and it can come from anyone, we can do things through our committees or wherever where we think something we want to look at or whatever. I think it's a healthy process, and hopefully we'll be able to do more of that as we go along. The last item of new business is we're now in a position, after talking to Paul, to do hybrid meetings, which means people can come to the office for the meeting, or people can stay on Zoom. I don't think, and Paul can tell me what exactly we can do. I don't think the contemplation is to go to one or the other. Maybe you can tell me what we can do, Paul?
We were running hybrid meetings earlier, so we can do in hybrid meetings starting whenever the board wants. And typically in those cases, staff would definitely be here, and anybody who wanted to come to the office and be part of the meeting would be able to do so. So we can start that at the board meeting. We do have to just double check if there's any governance implications. I don't recall any from the way our bylaws and shareholder direction is set up, but I know some organizations had to amend some bylaws to do this. I haven't seen in LMCH's, but I will review those to confirm.
Great.
But we're ready to go as based on the board's direction, and whether that applies to simply the board meetings or the board and committee meetings. We're here to support the board in whatever way they want to work.
Great. So I wanted to bring that to the board. It's now available to us. I know from my point of view, I would probably be the person who goes to the actual physical office, just that's me, but other people may choose something else. Does anybody have an issue with doing hybrid meetings? Maybe we can chat about that, or people can let me know. So yep, go ahead, Adrian.
Yeah, I concur with you, Phil. I prefer in-person meetings as well. I guess the only question I would have for Paul is, would you be providing lunch? Because they're always good before.
We will look to see what the procurement policy says about that.
You're not going into that, Adrian. Great.
I haven't experienced lunches here, so no.
Good, yeah.
We will, we would provide the, coffee and water as.
Coffee and water, sounds great.
Any other comments on doing hybrid meetings as we move forward? John, go ahead.
Wondering, with all the extra money in the budget, Paul, maybe we invite the tenants, get a gourmet chef, and just cook a nice meal for everyone.
Everybody's a comedian today. As you get to the end of the meeting.
Well, I think just jumping off, and a friendly amendment to John's comment through the chair is, I think one of the things we could look at as we sort of normalize in-person meetings is meeting in some of our community and buildings and doing things, so we can sort of, I don't know when COVID's going to allow for that and when we're going to be ready as an organization, but it's definitely something we should put on the horizon as something that might be helpful for the board to hear more from tenants, and tenants to see how things are happening.
Great. Adrian, go ahead.
Yes, I would just like to add to that, Paul. I think it's an excellent idea to meet at some of the locations, and I would invite you all to attend a location in the county, because it's something that maybe a number of board members may not be familiar with, and I think it might be interesting to see them firsthand. Yeah, I think that's great, and I think we can. They'll still be hybrid, but I certainly would welcome that opportunity. So yeah, I'm not sensing there's any real objection to doing the hybrid meetings, and those of us who want to take advantage, great. And if Zoom is easier, that's great too. So I don't think we need a motion or anything like that. I just wanted to make sure that was sort of a general direction we wanted to go. So thank you very much, everyone, for that, and for the issue approving the procurement issue. So that brings us to the meeting adjournment, and thanks everyone for coming.
I'll just look for a mover and a seconder. Moved by John, seconded by Shelley. All in favor of adjournment? Wonderful. Thanks, everybody. So have a good Friday and enjoy the weekend. The one last thing I should indicate is I'm trying to reach out to everybody as much as I can. I'm also trying to attend every subcommittee meeting as regularly as I can, sort of to educate myself and provide any support I can. So have a good evening, and I'll talk to all of you or some of you soon.
And go vote on Monday. And go vote on Monday.
I don't want to talk about politics, and don't tell anybody who to vote for on this forum, Louis.
I didn't say you. I just said.
God bless you. Have a good evening, everyone. Break a leg.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Night.
Night.